Hey, what's up? I'm going to give Susan Sontag a little break for now. Yesterday, I started reading this book right here, What Photography Is by James Elkins, which was recommended in the Flag Photo group on Facebook. In the first few pages, I realized that it was going to deal with material from Camera Lucida by Roland Barthes. Elkins actually encourages you to stop reading if you haven't read this little book, and I want to do the same here. Please get it, read it. It's short. And, I can try to summarize the ideas and present the way I read them. But more than theory, this book is a little piece of art that deserves to be experienced. I read Camera Lucida a couple of years ago, and I still carry a few of the ideas I drew from it now when looking at photographs. I thought I should really reread it to refresh my opinion before tackling Elkins' text. I'll make a series of videos about it, just like with Sontag's on photography, although I suspect that I might take it easier with Barthes, as the text doesn't aim at being rigorous and critical in the same way Sontag does. In the first chapter, Barthes recounts his experience of looking at a photograph of Napoleon's youngest brother, Jerome, taken in 1852, and being fascinated by his eyes and the fact that they looked at the emperor himself at one point. We don't really have a photograph of Napoleon, only paintings. Nicéphore Niepce's photograph was taken in 1826, and Napoleon died 5 years earlier. This is such a beautiful, poetically charged way of looking at photographs, or reading in them not only what lies on the surface, but trying to reach out further into the person's life's experiences, family, and in this case, history. Right from this page, Barthes sets a mournful, melancholic tone, not only by reaching back to loss and family, but also confessing his solitude when he was unable to find anyone that shared his fascination with his image. Life consists of these little touches of solitude, end quote. Okay, tangent alert. Coincidentally, 2 days ago, I was talking with a friend about an essay on artificial intelligence and what it means for the arts. I'll link it down below. It's actually a quite interesting read. The text touches on loneliness, specifically when engaging with art. The writer L.M. Salcasas quotes political philosopher Hannah Arendt. Loneliness, for Arendt, she noted, feels like not belonging to the world at all, which is among the most radical and desperate experiences of man. Art should be a bulwark against that loneliness, nourishing and cultivating our connections to each other and to ourselves, both for those who experience it and those who make it, end quote. So this is a very different way of looking at a similar experience, right? I argued with my friend that involving oneself deeply with a work of art, like literature, painting, or photography, like Barthes did with this photograph, actually defines the limits of how we see it and where we differ more sharply, and can feel lonely if we form an individual opinion about it. So I think I'm with Barthes on this one. Back to him. The second chapter muses about the unclassifiable nature of photography and how it operates as a transparent envelope of the subject itself. Quote, show your photographs to someone, he will immediately show you his. Look, this is my brother, this is me as a child, etc. The photograph is never anything but an antiphon of, look, see, here it is. It points a finger at certain vis-a-vis and cannot escape this pure dialectic language, end quote. I had to look up dialectic. It's been a while since college. It means that meaning is defined by context. In this case, photographs are meaningless without a subject. This is certainly one way of looking at photographs. We can surely ignore form, the fact that one photograph is black and white, color has movement, or creates an artificial illusion, and focus purely on contents. I think this innocent way of looking at photographs is how we all first encountered it as a facsimile of reality. Barthes argues that this is what separates photography from other mediums, and not the way we can classify it by genres like landscapes, objects, portraits, nudes, or aesthetics like pictorialism or realism. These classifications, he argues, can also be applied to other forms of representation like painting, drawing, or even writing. In this chapter, he also introduces, in a very subtle way, an idea that he develops further later, the link between photography and death. Quote, "It is as if the photograph always carries its referent with itself, both affected by the same amorous or funeral immobility at the very heart of the moving world." End quote. This whole chapter is written in a very free style that favors flair and beauty over clarity. Actually, the whole book kind of swings back and forth between different levels of emotion and reason. The rest of the chapter muses on how different writers and academics that have tackled the subject have failed, according to Barthes, at addressing the heart of what photography makes him feel. Some by looking too closely at composition, form, and other technicalities, and, quote, others are historical or sociological. In order to observe the total phenomenon of the photograph, these are obliged to focus at a great distance. I realize with irritation that none discuss precisely the photographs which interest me, which give me pleasure or emotion, end quote. The third chapter is really short and is written in a more analytical way and deals with how a reductive way of thinking about a subject, as in an approach that aims to find a system by which an entire field can be understood, always leaves him cold. He asks himself, why mightn't there be, somehow, a new science for each object, a mathesis singularis and no longer universalis? So I decided to take myself as the mediator of all photography. Even though logical, this interior monologue style sets the confessional tone with which he is warning us that his response to photography in this book will be highly personal. The fourth chapter, with a very informal style, presents in full this link to death he hinted at before. He describes the feeling that a photograph is able to evoke as, quote, the spectrum of the photograph, because this word retains, through its root, a relation to spectacle and adds to it that rather terrible thing which is there in every photograph, the return of the dead, end quote. After presenting this frightening idea, he leaves us hanging and goes on to explain how he perceives the chemical and optical processes of making a photograph, and how he's not a photographer and doesn't feel inclined to explain photography from a photographer's point of view, like me, but rather has been the subject and spectator of it. I like how with literary flair he presents an abyss when talking about every photograph and death, and then it feels like he's leading us along right next to the edge. Circumventing death like this makes it more vertiginous, and I remember reading that bit a few times and stopping and thinking about it, how I saw death in the work of many photographers I love, how many of them and their subjects are gone, and how more fundamentally, every photograph is about an instant that is no longer there, frozen paradoxically in a moving world like Barthes described. The fifth chapter stays with this informal style, jumping in and out of an internal monologue and using parentheses to convey the multiplicity of thoughts taking a hold of him. It starts with Barthes recounting his experience in first person when being photographed, his frustration with how photography cannot capture his true self, the many versions of his identity, and even when it seems to capture what he might have been going through internally, the image can be misconstrued by the context in which it is presented. The writing style mirrors how disjointed he feels, and even the pace at which I felt inclined to read this bit immersed me into the anxiety one might feel when being photographed. Quote, "If only I could come out on paper as on a classical canvas, endowed with a noble expression, thoughtful, intelligent, etc. In short, if I could be painted by Titian or drawn by Chloé. But since what I want to have captured is a delicate moral texture and not a mimicry, and since photography is anything but subtle except in the hands of the very greatest portraitists, I don't know how to work upon my skin from within." End quote. There's also an element of humor to this whole bit when his erudition is contrasted with his angst. I think it really captures the type of flow we portraitists strive for when photographing someone. Okay, so every photographer has a different approach to portraiture, but a very common, well-trodden path is chaining poses, backgrounds, expressions, and angles with as few gaps or uncomfortable silences as possible. This allows us to maximize the time with a sitter and prevent them from withdrawing into a sense of insecurity, frustration, or self-awareness that might stifle their performance or the illusion of being relaxed. In short, we create an environment that is conducive to posing, not thinking. Platon does the opposite, and Annie Leibovitz claims that she doesn't think you should make the subject comfortable. So your mileage may vary. Barth's self-awareness is not only amusing but also sharply defined. Quote, "In front of the lens, I am at the same time the one I think I am, the one I want others to think I am, the one the photographer thinks I am, and the one he makes use of to exhibit his art. In other words, a strange action. I do not stop imitating myself, and because of this, each time I am, or let myself be, photographed, I invariably suffer from a sensation of inauthenticity, sometimes of imposture, comparable to certain nightmares." End quote. Around the middle of the chapter, Barthes brings this fast pace to a halt and touches again on the subject of death. Quote, "To tell the truth, I am neither subject nor object, but a subject who feels he is becoming an object. I then experience a microversion of death, of parentheses. I am truly becoming a specter." End quote. He frames the photographer's efforts to make the picture lively and engaging as a way of really trying to escape this inevitable outcome of the photographic image. It is the very stillness of the medium, the freezing of time, that signifies death to him in this context. I think it creates this kind of pessimistic link between photography and death that I haven't really been able to shake off since I first read it. The thing is that it doesn't come across as a cold piece of detached theory about photography. Instead, he uses literary devices to wrap you up in what photography makes him feel. He ends the chapter with a sweet poetic analogy to shake off this morbid feeling by bringing in another sense into the equation: hearing. For me, the noise of time is not sad. I love bells, clocks, watches, and I recall at first photographic implements were related to techniques of cabinet making and the machinery of precision. Cameras, in short, were clocks for seeing. And perhaps in me, someone very old still hears in the photographic mechanism the living sound of the wood. End quote. Thank you so much. Take care. If you made it all the way here, please like, subscribe, and all that. I'll see you next week.